All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We wanted to have this opportunity to talk with you about pre-health or study abroad opportunities for pre-health students, and the CCI and international programs are really excited to be collaborating on this info session again this year, and so hopefully this will be helpful for you. And I think if there's any sort of overarching or major takeaway that we want you to have from this info session is that you can do both. You can be a pre-health student and study abroad. It takes careful planning and some maybe juggling of certain classes and other things, but it's definitely doable. So we'll do some introductions quickly. And Hannah, I don't know if you'd like to go first and just introduce yourself to the group.
Yep. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Hannah Benz. I'm a health professions and STEM advisor at the CCI. And I always like to begin by saying that about a third of our applicants to pre-health programs actually spend time abroad. The majority do one semester abroad, but we have students do a winter term abroad, a summer abroad, and even the occasional student who does a full year. And we just think that it's an exceptional experience that really enhances not only an application, which is the secondary gain, but just your story and your preparedness for a career in the health professions. So we're always delighted to participate in this because we really want to encourage you to consider seriously spending time abroad. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Stacy Taboto and I work with Alessandra in the International Programs Office, and I advise for all the externally sponsored programs as well as our Middlebury program in Oxford.
Great. Thank you. And I'm Alessandra. I'm one of the other study abroad advisors in the office here at Middlebury. I work specifically with the Middlebury programs in Spanish-speaking Latin America and Italy. And then Stacy and I have colleagues that work with the other of the schools abroad as well. We also have two wonderful returnees with us today, Anthony and Phaedra, who were both abroad last year. Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe tell us your major and where you were?
Hi, my name is Anthony. I'm a senior biology major and pre-med. I went to Valparaiso, Chile to study, and I went last fall.
Thank you. And Phaedra?
Hi, I'm Phaedra. I'm also a senior. My major is neuroscience, and I'm also pre-med, and I was at the DIS Stockholm program for all of last year for 2 semesters.
Fantastic, thank you. So Anthony and Phaedra will be here throughout the presentation to help answer questions and share more about their experiences as well. So I think, as Hannah already mentioned, this is sort of a fun fact that's just really great to start out with. But yeah, about a third of pre-med applicants have gone abroad in recent years, and that includes J-term and summer, which are really great options, especially for very busy students like yourselves that have very full semesters during the academic year. So just a little plug for that, and to show you that it is possible to do both pre-health and study abroad. We also wanted to take a minute and just acknowledge that, as with many things right now, COVID-19 has had an impact on study abroad and the current options and situations that are available. So currently, as you may know, maybe hearing from friends or peers, there have been a lot of program cancellations. Middlebury did have to cancel all study abroad participation this semester due to the situation with COVID-19. Looking forward, it's hard to know at this point what spring holds for us, but we may be seeing more program cancellations in the spring as well, just because we're still learning a lot about COVID and the best way to live in this new reality. So some things that we're seeing are increased entry restrictions or otherwise travel requirements for certain countries. So certain countries are accepting international visitors, but they have to follow certain protocols and fulfill certain quarantine or testing requirements in order to enter. So what does that mean for you as a student who may be interested in studying abroad perhaps next year or maybe even in 2 years? It's hard to know exactly how things are going to progress. Hopefully as things get better, we will see more and more countries opening back up, but it will happen in different ways and at different times. So a good example of this is that there are a number of EU countries right now who are accepting students who have visas or otherwise have proof of their intent to study there. So that's already becoming a possibility again for some students. There are other countries that are still not accepting any international visitors or international flights. So it'll really vary how things progress over the coming months. Again, in the entry restrictions and requirements that we're seeing now may very well continue for the next little while. So just keep an eye out for that, and our office will help you navigate those things. Some programs that typically run may still be running, but with modifications. So a good example of this are a lot of the pre-health programs that involve a practicum of some sort. Like for example, our program in Chile often would include courses that involve basic patient care techniques, working in local clinics. And we have unfortunately needed to suspend that part of the program for now because of the increased risk of exposure for both our students and the patients with whom they're working. So for all of these reasons, as you're thinking about studying abroad, it's a really good idea to have a couple of options in mind, maybe your first choice and then a close second, perhaps in different locations or different styles of programs, just so that you have more options to consider as we know more about what the future will hold for us. But pivoting now, thinking more generally about study abroad, a good question to start off with is study abroad right for you? And there are different things that you can consider when thinking about this. A big one is what your motivations are for studying abroad. So what are your goals for your experience? They may be major related or related to your future profession or career, but they don't necessarily have to be. Perhaps you have a personal goal of becoming fluent in another language and you feel like the best way to do that is going to be studying abroad in a country where that language is spoken. So whatever your motivations and goals are, it's good to have an idea of those as you're considering different program options. Very important for students such as yourselves, how is study abroad going to fit into your academic plan? And so this may mean having some very detailed conversations with your academic advisors or with the pre-health advisors at the CCI as well, who can give you more information about aligning your study abroad plans with the timing of your MCATs, for example, and other things to consider. And I'm sure Hannah can tell us more about that in just a moment. But then also thinking about how your study abroad experience might apply to your future self. And again, that could be professionally, it could be academically, or it can be personally. And so, thinking about those things and how you see this fitting into your long-term goals is always a good idea as well. And so, yeah, I don't know if we want to maybe, Hannah, take this opportunity now just to talk about weaving study abroad into some of the other things these students need to consider.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd like to say is that while the coursework that you do abroad is incredibly helpful to your future study, the prerequisites cannot be completed abroad. So you couldn't take organic chemistry in France and you couldn't take biochemistry in China. Medical schools simply won't accept those classes. That's not to say that if you took embryology, or we heard earlier that Anthony took physiology, those are wonderful classes, but they won't count towards the prerequisites. We also touched on something interesting in the previous meeting that I wanted to quickly build on, and that's, let's say you're in China and you can't take any STEM classes. You could do some experiential learning there that's really beneficial for medical school. So we had a student in China a couple of years ago, and she did a one-on-one project with a professor on Chinese medicine. And it was really interesting because it formed the basis of one of her essays for medical school, sort of comparing Eastern and Western medical philosophies. So there's a tremendous amount to be gained, even if it isn't formal coursework.
Great, thank you. All right, and that parlays really well into the benefits of studying abroad. And there are many benefits to be had. I know it may seem like we're a little bit biased because we work in the international programs office, but again, I think Hannah and Stacey can corroborate these for me. So again, if one of your goals is being fluent in another language, being abroad in a country where that language is spoken is probably one of the best ways to gain that fluency or that proficiency and build those skills. Increased employability is something that a lot of study abroad students can take advantage of or benefit from upon their return. Having a study abroad experience on your resume is often something that future employers or admissions officers for medical school or graduate school do like to ask about and are intrigued by. So that can be, you know, something that helps you stand out from the other applicants in the pool. Skills such as intercultural competency and communication skills are something that are strengthened while you're abroad. And that doesn't necessarily mean learning to communicate in a different language, although that certainly is a part of it, but you can gain those skills by being in an English-speaking country or a country that you're, where the language is a native language for you already, just by virtue of working with people who come from a different cultural background, different perspectives. Those skills are really valuable to have. Likewise, study abroad helps students increase skills such as flexibility, creativity, problem solving, which are all beneficial in a myriad of different career paths. So Hannah, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that as well.
Nothing really, just to build on something you've said, that deans of admissions for professional schools tell us that they really value the abroad experience because you know, historically, we all, as Western physicians, we always haven't approached patients from backgrounds different from our own with humility and respect. And the thinking is that as somebody who goes abroad gains an appreciation and understanding that there is no one size fits all to every single individual. And they approach then patients with backgrounds different than their own with an understanding that they might understand illness differently. And they're better listeners and they're better communicators and they're better at creating a shared patient agenda based on this understanding that they gained abroad. So admissions folks see this as highly valuable part of the application.
Great, thank you. All right, and so I'll turn it over to Stacey. Oh, I'm sorry. One last piece here. So this is an important piece too, right? GPA, and how does study abroad affect your GPA, or does it? This is a concern for a lot of students, but we've done longitudinal studies that show that on average, students do just as well GPA-wise abroad as they do back here on the Middlebury campus. So that's something helpful to know, especially since your grades from abroad will transfer back and be recorded on your Middlebury transcript and factor into your overall GPA. So hopefully that helps with your planning and decision-making as well. All right, and so now I'll turn it over to Stacey, who can tell us more about choosing a program.
Great, thank you. I know it can be really overwhelming to start on this process because there are so many different program options out there. So I'm going to go over kind of some very general information about the kinds of things you might want to ask yourself and the kinds of programs that are out there. And I will I'll mention also some examples of programs that have been popular for pre-health. And then at that point, I'll let Anthony and Phaedra talk more about their programs and their experience too. So how in the world do you get started? There's lots of different types of programs out there. And obviously, one of the things you're going to consider is if you want an English-speaking program or do you want a program in another language. You should know that if you do want to go to a country where the language spoken is taught at Middlebury, then you do have to meet Middlebury's language requirements. Those vary a little bit from department to department, but they're all at the advanced level. So if you want to go to a Spanish-speaking country, you do have to meet the Spanish requirement. In most cases, this means going to the Middlebury School abroad. There are a few exceptions to that. But just so you know, that is a policy that Middlebury has. But there are lots and lots of English-speaking options. there are also two very different types of programs. There's a Middlebury School Abroad, and then we also have lots of externally sponsored programs. So within the Middlebury Schools Abroad, the English-speaking options are in Oxford, in the UK, and also in India. And we also have a couple of exchange programs in the UK as well. And so those are two different types of programs. And then there's different structures of programs out there too. So you can, in some countries, go to a regular university and attend courses at a university right alongside students getting their degree there. And I think of it as a spectrum almost, that on one end of the spectrum are the university-based programs. On the other end of the spectrum, which is a completely different type of program, is a field-based program, which is more experiential, hands-on, kind of less traditional classroom setting. And then there's a lot in between where different programs that have components of both university classes and field-based options or other kinds of hands-on learning that you can do. Important to think about the type of program you want to, not just what do you want to study or where do you want to study. There are programs out there too, particularly a lot of the field-based programs that have different themes to them. So you can find programs that are specifically focused on pre-health or global health or one of those types of themes that may be interesting to you as a pre-health student. There's lots of programs focused on environment, things like that. You also want to think about, as you're getting started, how long can you go abroad for? We encourage you to go abroad for the year if you can, but we also know a lot of students can't do that, especially as a pre-health student if you're trying to satisfy requirements and prerequisites for med school, things like that. You can't always go for that long. So certainly a semester is a great option, or a short-term program, say in the summer, is also a really great option. So just know that you do have all of those things that you can choose from. And we'll talk mostly in this session about study abroad, but there are also some domestic programs that you can do as well if you decide that studying abroad isn't right for you. For example, there's a marine biological laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts that has a great program, and things like that. So just so you know, those are options to look for. And also just other things to consider when choosing a program. These are just different categories of things that you might want to think about as a pre-health major. We already talked a little bit about major requirements in academics, and can you transfer credits from abroad? I think it's important to point out that if you go through our approval process and you're approved to go abroad, as long as you follow all the rules, such as pass your classes and successfully complete a full load of courses, you will earn the full semester abroad. If you're going for a semester, you will earn a full semester's worth of credit. However, within that credit, what can count toward your major, that's up to your department. So sometimes students get major credit satisfied abroad and sometimes they don't. Sometimes students choose deliberately to take a semester away from their major. When you apply to study abroad, we ask you to have an academic rationale for whatever you're choosing to do, but that doesn't have to be your major. For example, I mean, Hannah mentioned the opportunity to do some kinds of experiential activities that might be relevant toward your long-term professional interest, and maybe related to your major, but you don't necessarily have to be getting major credit for that. Exams, I'm gonna let Hannah talk more about this in terms of medical school exams. We already mentioned the prereqs for medical school. And then we should also mention that the curriculum can differ abroad quite a bit, especially if you're a STEM major. A good example of this is in England. Their degree programs are generally only 3 years, and their students choose what they're studying in university before they even apply to university, and then that's all they study. So, and this is true in a lot of countries, that they really tend to be much more focused much earlier on than we are within an academic field. So you may be taking a second year course abroad that may be much more like our third year course or fourth year course. So just to know, you really do have to pay attention to course prerequisites when you're choosing the courses that you take abroad, because the way that degree programs are structured can be quite different from here. And also related to that, the nature of the lab courses may be different too. So at some universities, you have to sign up for a lab separately from the course. So you might be choosing a science course, for example, but you have to also choose the lab course as well. So we can help you navigate through that, and your academic advisor can help give you advice through that too. But that's a good thing to know going into it, so that when you're looking for programs, you can know kind of how things are structured. We always advise, no matter what, to try to save your electives for when you're abroad. It gives you a lot more flexibility when you're abroad of taking courses that are electives, in terms of like not having to look for a very particular type of course when you're abroad. And I'm at this point, like Hannah, I would like if you would want to say more about taking exams related to med school and the timing for all of that.
Sure. So basically, if we're talking about the MCAT, which is the main exam people take in the health professions, because other health professions require GREs, and that isn't content-based, it's more like SATs. But you need to have your prerequisite courses done before you can sit for the MCATs. So you have to have your physics and your biology and your chemistry. And the other thing is you really can't take the MCATs during the academic year. It's simply too much to balance your Middlebury coursework and your MCATs. So what that means is you need to take MCATs during the summer. And if you'd like to take it between the junior and senior year, which a lot of our students do, then your prerequisite courses would need to be done by the end of junior year. And it's completely possible to go abroad and have your prerequisites done. It just requires careful planning. So like I say, it's by no means impossible, but sometimes people say, oh, I'm not going to be done with biochemistry. And we say, okay, so let's do a pros and cons. How important is it then you take the MCATs during the summer between your junior and senior year versus a once in a lifetime experience going abroad?
Great, thank you. So there's lots of other things to consider. And I think these are good questions to ask yourself even before you start looking at different program options, because if you do some thinking about these sorts of questions, it can guide your search in looking for a program. So some examples of these types of questions, some of this we've already talked a little bit about, but I tend to advocate for students to think about what you want to study even before you think about where you want to study. So, I mean, it's perfectly fine to have a particular country in mind that you want to go to, but I also think it's really important to think about your academic goals around study abroad and what do you want to study. Because the best place for studying a particular thing might be a country that you've never even considered going to before. So really do think a lot about the academic goals that you have and the types of courses that you want to take. And what are the academic strengths of a program that you're considering, and how does that all fit together? We already mentioned thinking about the goals for your experience academically and otherwise. It's also good to think about the type of program you want. I mentioned before, like university-based program versus a field-based program, in terms of like, how much independence do you want? Do you want to be part of a study abroad program, and that, in which case maybe a more field-based program might be more right for you? Or sometimes students come in and tell me, I want to go to a huge university in a huge city and have the complete opposite experience from Middlebury, which is also perfectly fine. So you do want to think about how much independence you want, and what type of structure of program, in terms of what kind of learner are you? Do you like the really hands-on type of learning experiences? Or do you like being in large lectures and those sorts of questions? Some of the questions might be similar to what you thought about when you were looking for a college. Where do you want to live for a semester or a year, or however long you're going to go for? What type of city are you looking for? What kind of place do you want to live? Do you want to live in a homestay, or do you want to live in an apartment, or do you want to live in a dorm type setting? We're going to talk a little bit more about financial aid and costs later in the presentation, but obviously that's something to think about when you're starting to consider different programs too. And if you've gone to any of my other information meetings, you hear me harp on this a lot. I think different programs are right for different students. So don't just follow the hype, and don't just look at the programs that you've heard of before from other students. think about jumping out of your comfort zone and taking risks and looking at programs that you might not have thought about before, and really do your homework and do your research and ask yourself these types of questions. This is your study abroad experience. Hannah already mentioned the once in a lifetime opportunity. It really is different being a semester or a year abroad student. It really is different from traveling. And so it really is an opportunity. So really think about what you want to do and what you want to get out of the experience. So just a few examples, and these are really just a few examples. There are many, many more options out there. A good place to start in looking for examples of programs that we suggest is to go to our webpage. And on our webpage, we have suggested programs that we've had good experiences with before, that we've had students give us good feedback about. These are just options that have pre-health foci of different programs you can do. At the Middlebury Schools Abroad in Chile and France, there are some pre-health tracks that you can participate in that have kind of some more hands-on components to them as well. DIS in Scandinavia, which Phaedra can talk to you more about, has different course options in medical policy and practice, public health, neuroscience, biomedicine. They have a lot of hands-on learning opportunities. For example, courses that you can take that are taught in hospitals by doctors, a lot of more hands-on clinical stuff, which, as was mentioned earlier, may or may not be possible next year, depending on COVID and that sort of thing. But there are programs that do give you these types of experiences. SIT Study Abroad is really known for their field-based programs, and all of their programs have different themes to them. So you can find programs that focus particularly on global health. Related to that, there's a program called IHP that's part of SIT that's a multi-country program. And the whole idea of that program is a comparative type of study. So for example, they have a program that focuses on health and community that spends time in 2 or 3 different countries. CIEE has a program in Botswana that focuses on public health. And there are many, many different universities in English-speaking countries where you can take a wide variety of science and health-related courses. King's College London has a particular program focused on health and society, which is really directed toward pre-med US students. So that's an example of a specialized program too. So like I said, these are just examples of programs that tend to be popular. I think at this point, it might be good for Phaedra and Anthony to talk about their programs in particular and maybe how they fit into these structures, what you guys studied, how it fit into your interest in pre-health. I don't know who wants to go first.
I could go. Sure. So as far as how my experience fit into my pre-med interests, my academic plan was more focused on biology, I'd say, but most of my pre-med opportunities came from outside of that. Well, for one, there was one class I took that was an internship, but I heard that from Alessandra that got at the moment isn't happening in the future, but I definitely encourage pre-med students to at least ask about what opportunities there are out there. Don't ever assume, you may be surprised. But at the very least, I had some experience in a family consultation clinic. I was able to speak to some doctors about their opinion on healthcare in general in Chile. I had some patient exposure, a good amount of understanding of public health through health fairs and such, which I found valuable. Another, outside of that internship class, I did a non-credit research, which I know is an often desirable experience for those interested in pre-health. And for this, I stumbled upon this opportunity just from meeting a professor at my university, which I think, so it's valuable to do some research on what you want out of a school, if you do, and that research is possible, especially for schools that have a campus with the resources, just labs, which again, I recommend consulting with advisors for that. And on top of that, one of my favorite experiences is honestly just being in an abroad country itself. As Alessandra said earlier, it's for that flexibility is very promising. And I also want to give a quick advocacy for studying in a second language, because personally, one of the main reasons why I even started Spanish in the first place is that a physician that can speak Spanish it's very useful and very valuable, especially in New York. And I find that even just being in the country and learning how to communicate casually with people, that I think that's going to do wonders for anybody down the road who wants to work with patients, because it prepares you for more personal connections with the patients, being able to communicate more accurately. So I definitely recommend that. And as far as grades go, especially when taking when taking classes in a second language, especially not one that you learn from early on, with the nature of being immersed in a culture and in a country, the language learning comes faster than you think. And I think that after 2 to 3 weeks, I felt very comfortable. And being in a class that was being spoken natively in Spanish, it felt as if I was in a Spanish class at Middlebury. And also, as far as STEM classes go, because this was a big fear of mine, taking a STEM course, let alone two in Spanish, a lot of scientific terminology is pretty identifiable in Spanish because it looks a lot like what it is in English. And as Hannah mentioned, I took physiology, and as intimidating as that sounds, taking Spanish, it's pretty similar to English, and I'd say that I learned a lot of applicable things that I can use here.
Yeah, I would just second all of that, but also say that I also went into the study abroad experience intending to, or focused on fulfilling like neuroscience requirements rather than pre-med. But I would say that a way that kind of came about in a way that I didn't expect was, and I don't know if this is specific to like DIS or Scandinavian methods of educating, but we had like field studies. In the middle of the week, we would have classes 4 days a week, and then Wednesdays, there would never be class, but then you would have field studies with your classes. And I found that especially in the second semester, there were a lot of ways or field studies in which we went to clinics. And for example, my neurodegenerative diseases class went to visit a neurologist, and the three of us went through like the assessment questions with an actual Parkinson's patient. Another example that I really didn't expect, I took a transgender in Scandinavia class, and we visited a psychiatrist that worked at a gender clinic. And then another example would be my host mom, who was a physical therapist that worked in a team for like stress management and therapy. She worked with like occupational therapists and psychiatrists and physicians. I was able to shadow her. So I think there's a lot of like, even if you go into it intending to maybe fulfill requirements for your major, there's a lot of little ways that you can get exposure to things that'll be beneficial for the whole pre-med experience. Also, I would recommend that you maybe take 1 or 2 classes that aren't related to maybe STEM, because I found that in my second semester, that was the biggest difference. And I found that there were a lot of ways that in my STEM courses or my pre-med experience, like those intersect in ways that you don't necessarily expect. If that makes any sense. But it was very enriching in that way. So.
Great, thank you both. That's really helpful information. And I just also would say, like I mentioned before, I know this is really overwhelming to get started with all of the different program options. So as was mentioned, and as I'm sure Alessandra will mention at the end, is you can come meet with us in international programs, and you can also go meet with Hannah and her colleagues in CCI to talk about all of the different options and your interests and what might fit together and things like that. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're having trouble navigating all of this process. So I'll turn it back to Alessandra to talk about some more details.
Great, thank you. So another big question that a lot of students consider when they're thinking about studying abroad is the financial piece, and particularly what can they expect from their financial aid while they're abroad. Costs vary from program to program, but overall you can expect them to either be similar or perhaps even a little bit less than a typical semester on the Middlebury campus or at another US college or university. One thing to know is that all Middlebury students who study abroad incur a per semester study abroad fee. So each semester that you're abroad, you have this fee applied to your account. For the 21-22 academic year, it will be $18.50. So that's something that is good to keep in mind when budgeting as well. In terms of aid and how it can be applied, there are some general rules of thumb. Any federal financial aid that you might receive, so that is loans, work study, which is converted to a loan when you go abroad, any federal grants that you might receive, those can be applied to just about any program that is pre-approved by Middlebury. So if you go through the application process and receive approval from us to participate in a program, in most cases, you'll be able to apply your federal financial aid. If you receive Middlebury financial aid, this is a little bit more restricted in terms of what it can be applied to. Middlebury aid, so grants, scholarships that you receive from the college, can be applied to the schools abroad, as well as our exchange partners. So as I believe Stacy mentioned a little earlier, we have some exchange agreements with universities in the UK, for example, that you could use your Middlebury aid for. There are some particular programs that students in particular majors can go to and apply their aid as Middlebury aid as well. So IGS and IP&E majors who are focusing on South Asian studies or African studies and who want to go to a country in Africa that is not Francophone, because we have our program in Cameroon that you can take advantage of if you are interested in Francophone Africa, would be examples where you could also potentially apply your Middlebury aid. Otherwise, and externally sponsored programs for the most part do not qualify for your Middlebury aid. So you want to keep that in mind too when you're picking programs and deciding where and when you'd like to go. There's more information on our website. We have a whole section dedicated to it, so we definitely encourage you to check that out. I think most importantly, because everyone's situation is a little bit different, make sure that you speak with your financial aid advisor in the SFS office, because they'll be able to give you a more personalized idea of what your aid package might look like based on the program that you're interested in, how long you'd like to go, and that type of thing. Another thing to consider are study abroad scholarships, which are available. They tend to be small to medium in size. So in most cases, they won't cover the entire cost of the program, but they might cover your flight or take a big chunk out of your housing expenses for the semester. So those are definitely worthwhile considering. There are some like the Gilman Scholarship that are applicable to many different types of programs. Those you have to be a Pell Grant recipient for and meet a few other qualifications, but we have Middlebury students receive those scholarships, for example. There are also scholarships that are specific to a particular country or a particular field of study, including pre-health or pre-med, so you can take a look at those as well. And we have a list on our website of scholarships that you might want to look into if you'd like to explore that option. We also have a health and pre-med programs piece of our website as well, where we have study abroad programs that, as Stacey mentioned, are a little bit more thematic in nature perhaps, so would be of targeted interest to students who are thinking about a medical career in the future. And so now that you have all of this wonderful information, the big question is what to do next. If you want to go abroad next year, what do you need to do? So the big date to keep in mind is February 1st. That is going to be your application deadline for the 21-22 academic year. So even if you don't want to go abroad until spring of 2022, you still need to apply to Middlebury by February 1st. If you're looking at an externally sponsored program, they will then have their own application deadlines depending on the semester that you want to go. So once you get approval from us, you can follow their application timeline. We have some general requirements. We ask that students have a 2.67 GPA overall, so a B- average overall, as well as a 3.0 or a B average in their major courses. And if you're looking to go abroad in a second language, and it's a language that is taught at Middlebury, you also need to have a B average in your language courses. We're having a lot of info sessions online this fall. You can go to go/SA/events for more information. And we are also posting recordings of info sessions as they happen. So if you wanted to check out the info session for Germany, but it's already happened, you can go to that same website and the recording will be posted there. Talking with your academic advisor is really important. You may not have declared a major yet, but as soon as you do, be sure to let them know that you're interested in studying abroad and work with them to figure out when exactly would be the best time to go. Likewise, talking with your pre-health advisor at the CCI is going to be really important. Like Hannah mentioned, they can help you figure out timing in terms of pre-med requisites, taking the MCATs, and all of those other important things that you want to keep in mind. Talking with returnees like Phaedra and Anthony is a really, really great way to get a sense of what program might be the right fit for you, things to think about. And even after you choose a program, partnering up with a returnee who has done that program, they're going to be able to give you the inside scoop and let you know exactly what you need to do to prepare and have the best experience possible. And then finally, as Stacy mentioned, she and I and our colleagues in international programs are here and we're happy to chat with you about the different options available. As you can see from the slide, we do sort of break up our advising by program and location. So, you may want to meet with a couple of us to explore different program options, but you're more than welcome to do that. We have an appointment scheduler online through our contact us page that you can check out if you'd like to make an appointment. All right, and there's our events page. So all of our info sessions will be there this semester. Okay, so now that we've gone through and shared all this info with you, I'd love to turn it back over to Phaedra and Anthony to hear a little bit more about their experiences. We heard from them about how they chose a program and some of the things that they focused on while they were there. But I always love to ask too if there are any do's or maybe even don'ts that you would like to share with other students about planning to go abroad or picking a program.
I can start again.
Sure.
I have a do and a don't for now at the very least. A do is once again plan very thoroughly with all the advisors. There's pre-health advisor, there's major advisor, there's a broad advisor. All the advice would be saves a lot of stress. Also, I know that sometimes it's with distribution requirements for major, for pre-med, it can get a little daunting because you don't want to mess up your overall academic plans. So what I did, what helped me a lot was to make an Excel sheet that you could put down what course or what how many courses you're going to dedicate for certain departments for each semester. Have a bar for what requirements you do have, and almost like a checklist. That helped me, and it might also help the advisors that you want to work with, just to provide that visual. And the don't, as far as just deciding programs, would be don't be afraid to take risks, because often those have the sweetest rewards. I was already, as I said, an advocate for taking second language and not being too worried about things like how would this impact my grade or do I need to play it safe. I think Middlebury does a great job at equipping abroadees, I think is the word, for whatever obstacle they choose to take. So shoot for the stars.
Yeah, I would just agree with all of that. I don't have much to add. Yeah, alongside of risk taking and being open, I think that like one of the biggest things in terms of in relation to pre-med, learned when I was going abroad is just like there's so many avenues you can take within the, I guess, pre-med area. And I think it's really nice to like, if you have other interests, to want to bring them together and like find ways to piece things together so that you have the most fulfilling path for you. And I think that was something, like I said, that was really solidified in being abroad. So like Anthony said, intersecting language and pre-med, or like what I said with gender studies and pre-med, there's like so many things you can do with all of that stuff. So be open to exploring all of those avenues while you're abroad.
Thank you so much. I'd love to invite you all now who are here with us to put any questions that you might have in the chat. I do also have a list of questions that some of you had submitted via the registration form. So if there aren't any burning questions coming in through the chat, I can go through those as well. Okay, so Emma asked, do neuroscience classes transfer to Middlebury? That's a great question. So as Stacy mentioned before, you will automatically get general credit for your time abroad. So any of the credits that you earn will count toward overall degree completion. We have had students transfer neuroscience courses back in the past, and I think Phaedra, you've had some experience with this yourself, so you might be the best person to speak to this. But generally, your major will have typically a limit on how many major specific credits you can transfer from outside of Middlebury. So it's important to know what that limit is ahead of time and talk with your advisor about that. And then we have a couple of resources that you can use. One is the course information database on our website that will show courses that other Middlebury students have transferred back for major specific credit or department specific credit in the past. So it's a good place to start for sure. It's not exhaustive though. So just because you don't see a course there doesn't mean it's not possible. It just might mean that nobody has tried to transfer it before. And then, you know, if you can get syllabi ahead of time or course information ahead of time to share with your advisor, that can be really helpful to make sure that you're on the right track when you're picking courses. Phaedra, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with transferring credits back?
Yes, sure. I wasn't able to get as much as I wanted for the first semester I was there, but the second I was able to get one for neurodegenerative diseases. So as was stated before, mainly shooting for electives, I think, is your best, if not only, bet in terms of neuroscience, because there's a bit more flexibility. If it's related to neuroscience, you can not take whatever course you want. But I think a safer bet is to shoot for electives. But I was able to get one credit. But I also suggest like going early on and seeing what, like checking with the department head of the neuroscience department and early on seeing what you can get. I've misspoke in the past in terms of credit, but like transfer credit, I guess, is the better way to say it, as opposed to actual credit, because like Stacy said, you get actual credit for if you get approved. But transfer credit, checking early on is your best bet.
Thank you. Okay, so Chelsea has a question that maybe this is for you, Hannah. So she said that, I know you said that prereqs for pre-med don't count from abroad. Can they count from English-speaking countries, or do all courses abroad not count for requirements?
So medical schools are really clear on this. All courses abroad do not count. So you could take physics in Canada and it wouldn't count. Or you could go to an English speaking school like Phaedra did in Sweden or Denmark, but it will not count. So pre-med prerequisites do need to be taken in the United States. But I think I pointed it out in the other session, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. So Anthony did take physiology and it was hugely valuable, but it doesn't count as a prerequisite. So yeah, those have to be in the US.
Thank you. Okay, and I think I'll turn to the list here. So let's see, some of the stuff we had already talked about. Oh, so here's a good one. So I'm still very new to the pre-med track. Is it possible for people who have fulfilled very few requirements to study abroad?
So the answer is yes, but you might not get all your prerequisites done at Middlebury College, or you might need to then do physics during the summer. There's no rule that all pre-med prerequisites need to be done during that window of your 4 years at college. So essentially it comes down to choices. It's like, do I want to give up an abroad experience to finish all my pre-med prerequisites while in college? And sometimes those are conversations to have with your financial backers, because they might not be too thrilled for having to pay for courses outside of Middlebury. But we like to say that if you engage with the study abroad office early and with our office early, we're really good at navigating a path forward to make this incredible experience happen. In case you can't tell, I'm a huge fan of study abroad. I don't even like to go to New Hampshire. I mean, I'm that much of a stay-at-home. So when I see people like Phaedra and Anthony stretching so far out of their comfort zone to have this exceptional experience, I try to nudge everybody to do the same. I think it's transformative. So go for it would be my recommendation.
Yay, Hannah, thank you.
I would just add too, and I also don't remember if I said this in this session or the last one, but don't make assumptions about what you can and cannot do. You know, there's a lot of mythology out there of like, oh, I'm pre-med, I can't do this, or I'm a STEM major, I can't do this. Don't make assumptions about that. Come talk to all of us. Come talk to us in international programs. Go talk to the CCI advisors, talk to your academic advisor. You know, we can try to help you make it work. And that's what we're here for.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, Stacy, this next question I think might be best for you. How many times can you go abroad, and can you use J-term to go abroad?
Yeah, there's not a limit in how many times you can go abroad, although there tends to be natural limits just based on requirements. There is a requirement that you have to take at least half of your credit. In other words, 18 of the 36 you need to graduate have to be done at Middlebury. Actually, though, if you study at a Middlebury school abroad, that could count for that. But that's almost never an obstacle unless you're also a transfer student. It's almost never an obstacle. I would say most of the time students go abroad for 1 semester. We do have students who do a year. Once in a while, I have somebody that does 3 semesters, although that's a lot less common. But yeah, and about J-term abroad, I would say that going abroad for J-term, it's more common to do a J-term internship abroad, and that you would work with CCI on. There aren't that many programs that fall within our J-term that are structured study abroad programs, because not every school has a J-term like we do. So there are some out there, they do exist, but it's much harder to find than a semester-long program or a summer program. So that's kind of how that works more commonly, I would say. We do have, on occasion, this doesn't even come through our office, so we don't really know how many, but I know from talking to students, on occasion students do arrange independent projects abroad for J-term, which you would generally do with an advisor from your academic major department. I don't think that's all that common, but we do have students do that sometimes for J-term.
Great. And then, yeah, Hannah, did you want to add something as well?
I did. So every year or so, Pam Berenbaum takes a group or sponsors a group that goes to Rwanda. And I think last year, maybe in part with the Bold Scholars, there were about 20 students who did that. We've had students sort of design their own internships. Like we had a student connect with a psychiatrist in Brazil and did a month-long immersive internship looking at autism spectrum disorder in Brazil. We had a student spend a month in Ireland. Again, she had Googled sort of somebody who was studying something she was really interested in Ireland, and then was able to forge that connection and ultimately got funding from CCI to do that. So a lot of our pre-health students who feel like they can't really go for an entire semester get very creative with J-term in terms of an experience abroad.
That's wonderful. Thank you. There's a couple more. Oh, so this one, if you study abroad and are an athlete at Middlebury, do programs afford you the opportunity and time to train on your own? And that's a great question. Anecdotally speaking, and we actually this summer connected with a number of the coaches here at Mid as well to gather some of this information and their advice for their student athletes who go abroad. And from the sounds of it, in a lot of cases, you can still train on your own. It may not be with a team or in a team environment, but often your coaches will be willing to develop training plans for you that you can follow on your own. And they're happy to help you modify it based on the facilities and equipment that are available to you. So if you don't have access to a full gym, they'll give you more exercises to do that are just done with body weight, for example. Or one coach I spoke with mentioned that they had an athlete who, because of where they were not comfortable running outside by themselves. So what could they do instead that would keep them in shape and keep up their training regimen without having to run by themselves outside? So if you're interested in learning more, we also have a section of our website dedicated to students who identify with a number of different communities here on campus. And one of those are student athletes. So if you go to go/SA/diversity, you'll see the student athlete page there. There's also a STEM student page there, as well as a number of other pages that you can check out. But the athlete one particularly has a lot of recommendations for things to consider and think about that come from our coaches here at Mid. So hopefully that will be helpful for you. A question came through on the chat. Oh, sorry, Stacy. Did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to address the question on the chat. So
perfect. Okay.
Yeah, that's probably what you're going to talk about. Somebody asked about fulfilling the culture requirements and language requirements. If you do go to a country where the language spoken is not taught at Middlebury, such as Sweden or Denmark, you are required to take the local language as one of your classes. I know Phaedra took Swedish language and culture her first semester. And yes, the answer is you can potentially satisfy either the language distribution and or a cultural distribution requirement. Some of those have been pre-approved already since we send so many students to Denmark and Sweden. That language and culture class has already been approved for the language requirement if you're still looking for distribution credit. The cultural requirement, it really just depends on the class and the department, but in theory, yes, it is possible to satisfy those abroad.
And actually, this is a perfect follow-up. Chelsea, I'm sorry I missed this the first time. She also asked Phaedra, did you also have to take Swedish during your second semester or just the first semester?
I only took it my first semester, so I didn't take it the second semester. And I think the first time I took it, it counted as my European distribution credit. So I believe it counted for a cultural credit for me.
Great, thank you. So Stacy, in general, would that hold true for most cases? Like if you were to go to, we were talking about Korea in the last session, so I've got that on the brain, but if you were to go to Korea for the year, would you only need to take Korean the first semester or one of the semesters?
It might depend on the program, but from the Middlebury perspective and our requirement, you really only have to take it for a semester. Although actually most students elect to take it the whole time that they're there just because they feel like they're making progress and want to continue with it, but we would only require the first semester. Some programs might require a year, but we would require just a semester.
Perfect, thank you. And that goes into our next question. Second to last, somebody was asking about what selecting courses looks like in a study abroad program. And I think this varies quite a bit. So Stacy, I'm sure you could talk about it, but I'm curious to hear from Phaedra and Anthony too, what their course selection process looked like in their respective programs.
I can go first.
Sure.
The question was about course selection.
Yeah, so what was that process like for you?
I believe we had to choose online before we got there. I remember they had like a portal with like information about each, and a lot of times videos on like I mentioned, field studies and a lot of that stuff. And the first semester I chose a lot more STEM classes than non-STEM classes. And in terms of also applying to the research assistantship I did, that was done while I was still at Middlebury. So I would suggest, if that's something that you want to do, look into it early on and keep track of like the application dates and deadlines and stuff like that. But that was as early as the spring. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
For me, I also had to choose courses before I even stepped foot on the campus. But at least for my program, there was a bit of a shopping period. I chose like 6 programs, and then by like the first week, I had to narrow it down to 4. I felt it was a little bit of a chaotic experience for me, but what really helped me was having an academic advisor, which I hope that all programs have, as far as discussing how does the system work in a given country, logistics with traveling, especially this was important for me because my campus was so far away from where I normally lived that sometimes traveling in between or across the campus is impossible. So another tip is, so once again, be sure to ask everything and anything to advisors.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, there are some programs that you might not choose your classes at all until you get there. There are some universities that operate like that. So that does make it a little bit more challenging if you're trying to fulfill requirements, but that's all the more reason to really keep in touch with your advisor. And you can certainly talk to your advisor before you go about the types of courses that would transfer to your major and maybe the types of courses that would not transfer to your major, so that you can at least have some good guidelines going into it, so that when you arrive and you are choosing your classes, you can have a good idea of what is going to be okay. And then you can also, of course, email us back in international programs and email your advisor once you're on site and choosing your courses to make sure that you're getting into the right kinds of courses and that you're not going to come back to any surprises with requirements and things like that. And then, you know, there's everything in between. There's the registering online way ahead of time, and then there's not knowing anything until you get there, and then there's everything in between, and it really just depends on the program.
Yeah. Sure, Phaedra, go ahead.
Sorry, this is a program specific thing that I just remembered, but I will say in terms of DIS, you do have to choose your core course when you're applying to the program, I want to say. So that's something that is not as flexible as other courses. I think you can shop around a little bit more for your electives, but the core course, which you probably spend the most time trying to decide on, you do apply with or apply to, I think.
Great, thank you. And so I think I do want to be mindful of the time, but there's one last question that I think is a really good one that I would love to maybe wrap up with. Somebody asked, what are the pros and cons between studying abroad in the fall versus the spring? And I think this is a question that we get a lot. And aside from courses, and you know, if you have a required course that is only offered one semester and not the other, there's a few things to think about. For me, what comes to my mind, working primarily with programs in the Southern Hemisphere, is the fact that the calendars are flipped, right? So, and Anthony can talk more about this as well. And I don't know if this played into his decision at all. I'll be curious to hear. But So programs in Chile, Argentina, other Southern Hemisphere programs, you know, seasons are flipped and academic calendars are flipped. They're the opposite of ours. So that's really important to keep in mind when you're planning out summers on either end as well, whether you have an internship in mind, or maybe you're hoping to attend language school before you're going abroad, if you're going abroad in another language. Southern Hemisphere calendars often start in our fall semester. They often start mid to late July, early August, and will run until the middle to end of December. And then our spring semester, their fall semester, will typically start mid to late February or potentially even early March and go until mid to late July. So keep that in mind. Also keep seasons in mind. You know, in the fall, you're going to be moving from spring into summer in the Southern Hemisphere. So if you're a summer person and it's a little bit too short for you, especially if you're up in Vermont or another place like it, you might want an extra dose while you're abroad. And likewise, if you're going abroad during the spring semester, you're going to be moving from fall into winter. So that's a good thing to keep in mind too. And Phaedra and Anthony, I don't know. Oh, Stacy, go ahead, sorry.
Oh yeah, I would just add, there really isn't one answer to that. I think there's so many different factors, and it depends on your academic plan. It depends on your summer plans. It depends on the country you're going to. It depends maybe on the courses that a program is offering different semesters. I do have to say, feedback I hear from students who go to the UK very often comment on it being better to go at the beginning of the academic year rather than jumping in the middle of the year. And that's just really the way British universities are set up, is that there's a much better orientation that's a lot more thorough at the beginning of the year. Everybody's joining student activities at the beginning of the year, things like that. Interestingly, I don't hear that from other regions quite as much, but I think with the British universities, the way they're set up, there can be a lot of advantages to going at the beginning of the year. Also, one option, actually Phaedra can talk about this, is if you go in the fall with a lot of countries and you're really loving it, you could decide to stay, even if you hadn't originally planned to do that. That doesn't work everywhere, but it does work a lot of places too. So there's that advantage. Some people like going in the spring because then they stay and travel afterward. Some people go beforehand and travel in the fall. So there really are so many different factors, but I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
It looks like Hannah has something to add also.
Yeah, so historically, molecular biology, biochemistry majors like to go in the fall. And the reason why is because the Bayer class, molecular genetics, was a spring class. So if they went junior spring, then they were taking this really, really challenging class their senior spring, and that wasn't a whole lot of fun. So MBBC majors tended to go abroad in the fall, so that junior spring they were back here taking molecular genetics. Now that's sort of different because MolGen is also a fall option, and this year other classes can actually substitute for that, but that's sort of been the historical take from MBBC majors.
Great, thank you.
I can go ahead. So, right, as far as deciding fall, it was mostly an academic choice for me because I looked at the biology courses that I wanted to take at Middlebury and have a part of my Middlebury experience, and I saw that a good number of them were offered in the spring, and chose to go abroad in the fall so I could be back. And what helped me with that is, once again, tying to the advice I gave, which was to really have at least a tight initial plan, and having that on an Excel sheet, because you could see, all right, I want to have this course be a part of my career, this course and this course, and seeing how to navigate the puzzle pieces so that it all fits helps. And this is where having talking to your major advisor or department head for whatever major you have can be helpful, because they know what the status is with professors and what they're teaching. That's the major choice for me. And also maybe even friends. If everyone you know is going in the spring, that's another question that could be important.
And I'm mindful of the time, so I don't want to harp on this too much, but interestingly, I was thinking of adding almost the opposite of what Anthony just said. So which just goes to show you there's so many different factors and different opinions, and you have to do what's right for you. But having advised many students who have, I would just caution you about making plans around your friends, because I've advised many students who've done that and then their friends all changed their plans and then they were left wondering why they decided what they did, because then they realized like they weren't really doing what they wanted to do. So I think there's both. You know, you really do have to do what's right for you and consider all the different factors. So.
Yeah, Phaedra, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add, or going for the whole year.
Yeah, I had originally, I knew I was going to be abroad or away from Middlebury for the whole year. I had intended to do a domestic exchange for the second semester, and then I got there and liked it so much and had the flexibility to be able to continue, which was really, really nice. I would say the biggest thing about at least my personal experience or my personal program that might make someone choose either the fall or the spring would be like you said, seasonal stuff, either going from really short days to really long days or vice versa. That can take a toll in different ways. So I think that's definitely a very valid factor. But yeah, there's a lot of factors, as was said. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to Stacy and Hannah and Anthony and Phaedra for your wonderful insights and information. And we're all available. We're here. Yeah, we're happy to talk anytime. So please feel free to reach out to us. And like I mentioned too, this recording will be posted on the go/SA/events page. So you're welcome to revisit it at any time. Thank you again. Have a great night.